Stephen Couchman is unable to join us. So I'm going to be reading an introduction on his behalf. So bear with me, these are his words, and I'm just going to read his introduction to you. So Stephen says, I'd like to begin by thanking you all for taking the time to join us today. I've spent enough time in school offices over the years to realize that you are very busy people. With this in mind, Laura, Rebecca, and I are very grateful for the time you have all taken to complete reports, surveys, and to meet with us today to hear the results of the measured outcome research. The Student Opportunity Fund, which provides discretionary funding to high school principals, is one of several granting programs administered by PQR. With apologies for sounding like an old guy, I thought that you might be interested in a bit of the backstory before Rebecca presents the research results. The program came out of a conversation in 1997 between my father, Bob Couchman, Skip Morgan, the principal of Forest Lawn High School in Calgary, and his vice principal, Lori Mack. The principles of the program are very simple. 1, educators are most often the very first people to identify issues or potential issues with young people. 2, early, quick, and simple intervention can be a game changer. And 3, small acts of kindness leave a lasting impression. A very quick anecdote about the program from Barry Wagner, who was the principal at Arthur Voden High School in St. Thomas. A young man at the school was starting to get in with the bad crowd. A teacher got him involved with the school hockey team. The student didn't show up for the first game and was called down to the office the next day. What happened? The student responded that the guy he had borrowed his equipment from needed money and sold it to the local hawk shop. Barry immediately went to the hawk shop and bought the equipment back. The young man was a member of this year's Canadian junior hockey team. Okay, the last part is not true, but the first part is, and it demonstrates the intention of this program and its potential to make a tangible difference. Having funded the program for 16 years, the board of PQR wanted to know a couple of things. Have principals been good stewards of the funds? What, if any, are the patterns in use of these funds? And is there any way the program could be improved? At the risk of being a spoiler of Rebecca's presentation, I'm going to tell you now that the answer to all 3 of these questions is yes. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Rebecca Thomas. Rebecca is the lead consultant for the organization Measured Outcome. Measured Outcome is an organization that provides a collaborative, mainly web-based service for funders, nonprofits, and program participants focused on gathering feedback and information on programs delivered in the charitable sector. It is Measured Outcome, under Rebecca's excellent guidance, who undertook this study and created the Student Opportunity Fund the Student Opportunity Fund report that we are discussing today. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Laura. I'm just going to mute you so you can make lots of noise in the background. Again, Stephen has explained a lot of what we're going to be talking about. So a bit of housekeeping first. I'd just like to mention that everyone is on mute for the presentation. If you do have a question, we will have a question period at the end, and I think that you can hit your little yellow hand, and that'll sort of raise your hand, and I can unmute you, and you can ask either Laura or myself a question. I'm also going to try to make this webinar sort of run through of the report as brief as possible, because I know you're all crazy busy, and thank you for taking the time to join us for the webinar today. My name is Rebecca, as Laura Stevens said, and I'm the lead consultant with measuredoutcome.org. We were asked by Stephen and Laura in early 2014 to look at the Opportunity Funding Program from an evaluative standpoint, and I'm here to present the final report of our findings over the past year. Just as a quick way of background, stats that you already know, there are about StatsCan numbers from 2004 show us that there are about 872,000 children in Canada who live below the poverty line. That's about 1 in 7. Youth who are struggling with the effects of poverty often only need the basics to help them catch up if they're lagging in school. As you well know, seemingly small things that many people take for granted can mean the difference between education and dropping out to some kids. Things like eyeglasses, bus fare, or having food for lunch can make all the difference in a young person's education. And you guys, educators, are often the first people to see the early warning signs, but there's only so much help that teachers, guidance counselors, and principals can usually give with their limited time and budgets. So this fund was created in 1998 to help schools meet the needs of their higher risk kids. The goal is the program is to provide small grants to 40 schools in high needs areas across Canada that will allow administrators to help youth who are in immediate need. In order to complete this review and report, we accessed archival reports from the past 5 years of fund use data that Laura very kindly supplied us with. We also sent you all a survey to complete, which asked questions about the current fund applications, as well as challenges that you face and benefits that you see directly from your ground level view. Finally, we collected a few case studies from schools that have participated in a similar program that works to help educators develop innovative and responsive programs that meet the needs of high-risk youth in their schools. So thank you once again, all of you, for your participation in the report. We know that we have your hands full, and the time that you spent giving your feedback is greatly appreciated, both by myself and by the funder, by Laura and Stephen. It's very valuable for the future of the program, and as you'll see a bit later in the presentation, it is being directly acted on by the funder. Now, a little bit about what we were looking to understand more in the work, and Stephen went over this already, so I'll just quickly breeze over it. The 4 main areas of inquiry were, is this funding to schools necessary, and how effectively is it being used? Are there any spending and needs patterns? You guys are all from a very diverse range of schools. What are the areas of greatest needs across the country, and if the program is necessary, how can it be improved upon? Just as an overview, we reached out to everybody in the program, and as I said, there are 40 high schools across Canada. They're located in both large and small communities, and representative of 3 provinces, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. We also have a good mix of both public and Catholic schools, and the size of the schools varies from as small as 25 students all the way up to 1,600 students. We also have a few schools in the mix who work with specific targeted groups of higher needs youth. So you can see that we're dealing with a wide and diverse range of schools and student populations. And grants to each school also ranged quite a bit, between $500 and $4,500 per year, as determined by the program funder. Now, to get into the pretty charts and the data, this chart looks at the archival data that we took from the past 5 years. And what this chart represents are the top areas of overall cumulative funding. What we found is that big purple wedge on the right-hand side is the largest area of funding overall for the past 5 years. That's 19% of all funding went to food and nutrition programs. The next largest area is the pink wedge opposite food. That's transportation at 13%. Sports activities, which is the light blue wedge at the bottom right, is 11%. And then clothing and supplies, light green wedge at the top, was 9%. We wanted to focus on the top 4 areas of funding to see if there were any fluctuations or trends over the past 5 years. Food is pretty consistently the area that a majority of funds are invested in overall. Use of funding for food has consistently increased over the course of the fund, with a huge jump in 2013. This jump is likely accountable to a few schools who decided to use available funding exclusively for nutrition programs. Food is represented in the second set of bar graphs on the chart. You can also see in the transportation category at the end of the chart that funding use jumped here by 40% in 2014. We think that perhaps this is due to the particularly harsh winter that we all faced last year, as students had more challenges getting to and from school. Longer-term studies would give us more information about why that jump happened, and we'd be curious to see if it's a continuing trend. Sports activities and clothing and supplies were fairly consistent areas of spending over the past 5 years as well, which indicates a continued area of focus for all participating schools. So those are the top categories that we'll continue to look at in different patterns of use, and to look into more detailed differences between schools. We look to break down the stats according to 3 different variables in fund disbursement. You'll see more details in the actual final report, but in the interest of brevity, I'll just quickly go over these sort of 3 basic categories here. A quick rundown reveals that urban schools generally had a greater focus on transportation, while rural schools focused on field trips more. The focus on transportation for urban schools possibly is due to the availability of more formal busing programs in rural areas. Both types of schools consistently had food and clothing and supplies as key areas of funding as well. We also broke the data down in the second chart provincially, which revealed that participating schools focused on slightly different areas according to province. Food and transportation were top categories for Ontario schools, while sports were key for Alberta, and Manitoba had more of a general focus across all categories. This shows us that geography does matter in funding higher needs students, and that allowing a flexibility in spending of the funds helps reach the areas of greatest needs in each community. So it reinforces the idea that the flexibility is an important part of this fund. Finally, we looked at Catholic and public schools, which revealed a fairly even distribution of funds, with Catholic schools using slightly more funding for clothes and supplies. We're not sure why, possibly that's due to uniform requirements, and public schools used more funds for transportation and food. Again, please refer to the final report for further details on these comparisons and numbers. Okay, this is where we get to your feedback, which was very interesting. Unfortunately, the reality for you in running a school these days is that you need to do some fundraising outside of your formal budget. And the odds of successful fundraising are stacked against schools in low-income areas. Schools in high-income areas, on average, raise 5 times more each year than schools in low-income areas. The top 10% of fundraising schools raise as much as the bottom 81% of schools altogether, and that's huge. With this inequity in mind, we took a look at how many schools had access to other funding sources and what those other grants and extra fundraising activities meant for the schools and students who participated in this evaluation. 64% of schools represented here reported accessing other external funding sources for student programs. The funding included grants from other foundations, as well as student and community fundraising. And breakfast and food programs were the most commonly seen funds, with 23 out of 25 responding schools accessing funds specifically for student nutrition. So there again, we have a huge focus on food and nutrition. It is important to note that most of this sort of extra funding is restricted and targeted for specific programs within each school. On the right side of the page, we asked you what you saw as the highest areas of needs for your students and what you thought the funding should be focused on. And your responses directly reflected the overall trends that we saw in the existing data. Again, food. Food was the #1 area of funding and identified need by judging by your responses, also followed by sports activities and transportation, clothing and supplies, medical and special needs, and academic fees. Those were the top areas of funding that you saw as being important. We also asked you for your feedback on how the fund could be improved, and Laura will speak to this in a minute. To no one's surprise, an increase in funding amount and granting scope were the top 2 areas of improvement on your lists. You want more funding and you want it to be able to reach more kids. There was also feedback regarding communication about the fund. What are the guidelines? How can I spend the money? When there is a change of staff or leadership at the school, how do the new staff learn about the fund? All of this feedback was given directly and anonymously to the funder, who will speak to those developments in a second. And just to, again, keep speeding things along, I wanted to quickly wrap up my part of this presentation with a list of our recommendations that we believe would help this fund develop. Student nutrition was our first area of focus. This is clearly a national issue across all schools in Canada, and it is unfortunately quite a complex issue, and it's not one that is easily resolved. Food education and nutrition programs are certainly is not an issue that this program can resolve on its own, but clearly more work needs to be done on a national level to ensure that students are fed. Awareness and continued action towards nutrition is needed in schools on many different levels, and one of the parts of this program is to try and highlight, and this review is to try and highlight that need, and hopefully you'll be able to use that to speak to your own boards and your own donors about this issue. We also recommended a funder review of schools. Neighborhoods are dynamic places, and populations change and adjust with growing and shrinking economies and immigration trends. We suggested to the funder that a community review take place every 5 years or so to ensure that funds are reaching schools who are currently located in highest areas of need. We also recommended a clarity of use. Many of you mentioned that the guidelines for the fund were unclear. We have suggested to the funder that they review their communications processes with the schools, and work to develop a more clear communication with you and with the fund recipients. Program education was our 4th area of focus. Along similar lines, we have advised the fund managers to review how they help schools when program contacts and leaders move or leave their positions. And finally, we recommended that in order to keep this fund going, consideration be given to forming alliances with other funders and school boards to ensure a longer life for discretionary funding opportunities. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic back to Laura for our next steps. Laura?
Okay, hello again, everyone. So at this point, I'm just going to describe the steps that will be taken now that the report is complete. I may not cover all of the steps, but I'm going to address some of the main recommendations that came out of the report. So first of all will be report dissemination. So the report will be available online for download, and we will also be sending hard copies to each of you. I will send out information via email as to how to access the report, and you'll also be able to access a recorded version of this webinar. So if you could please take some time to read the full report, there's a lot of information, and please share it with others. So if there are any other potential funders that you can think of in your community, please feel free to share the report with them. And secondly, we plan to address the issue of communication. So many principals and administrators felt that they would benefit from more communication, as Rebecca indicated. So communication regarding the administration of the fund. So moving forward, we plan to set up brief phone meetings. I know your time is limited, but I think connecting annually with principals or administrators, so it's important that I speak directly to the person who is administrating the fund. And we were thinking possibly of setting these meetings up at the end of August annually, but I will be asking for your feedback about that, whether that's a convenient time for you. Another option would be sometime in November. I know it's always busy for you, so we're looking for a pocket of time when you might have a few minutes to chat. And we would set the meetings up in advance, so a time when it was convenient for you to take a few minutes to talk on the phone. And the purpose of these meetings would be to review the fund, answer any questions with regards to the criteria for spending, and to go over the required documentation and reporting, and just to get an update on your school demographics, and to talk about your current grant and whether it reflects your population. Because we feel that this is an issue that should be addressed immediately, we would like to set up phone meetings this current school year, just to touch base and to review reporting and the scope of the fund prior to the reporting deadline of April 30th of this year. So you can expect that I'll be in touch shortly to set a meeting up with you to have this discussion over the phone. And as a result of these meetings over the next month, hopefully, or month and a half, my plan is to create a list of frequently asked questions about the fund, and then I will create a document around that, and I will distribute it to all schools as a starting point for improving communication. And then we will work on a strategy for when there is a change in administration. Sometimes I am not made aware of that immediately, so that can be a problem. I don't find out about a change until later in the school year, but we will be coming up with a strategy around that and how to circumvent that. And then lastly, we are currently conducting a program review. So we're looking at community demographics, we're studying maps and gathering information. So we may be adjusting grants accordingly, up or down, depending on how communities have changed. And the great news is that this report has definitely confirmed that these grants are very effective. And the board and PQR are very, very pleased with the effectiveness of these grants, and we're looking to expand. And our plan is to expand to feeder schools. So if you have any referrals, please do let us know. This will also be a question I will have for you during our upcoming phone meeting. So those are our immediate plans to address the recommendations. And so that concludes our webinar for today. And so I'd like to take the time to thank you again for participating. I know you're really busy, and at this point we would like to open it up for any questions or comments that you may have. So I think, as Rebecca said, I think you can click on the hand icon and you can actually ask a question. You'll be unmuted, or you can type a question.
And if you do have any questions after we hang up, or if you are so fascinated with the webinar that you want to go back and watch it again, you can access the webinar online. We'll be sending a follow-up email. But you can also ask if it's a question about the data in the report. Please feel free to send me an email. I think you have it already from the webinar invitation, or please, of course, contact Laura as well. And I don't see any hands up. So Laura, I think we're We're good to go. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact us later offline. Thank you. Oh, Jennifer. Oh, we do have questions. Oh, they're popping in here. Rita wants to know, Laura, since the school year ends in June, is it possible to extend the deadline in the future?
Okay, so this is something we could certainly look at. Historically, the deadline for the report has been April 30th, and I guess the reason is so that we can process your report on your funding and then make a decision for the following year and get a check to you in a timely way for the following year. But I do understand that it is problematic because you do spend right through into June. So that is a discussion I can definitely have with Stephen, and we can look at adjusting that date of April 30th. So it may not be for this year, and what has happened for many schools is a report submitted on April 30th, and if you haven't used the entirety of your funds, then you can resubmit. And I know that's an extra step and is time consuming, so perhaps we can, yes, look at changing that date. So I will make note of that, and I will get back to everyone on that.
Jennifer has seconded the request for an end of school deadline and also has noted that thank you for the great presentation, and we really appreciate the fund. And I think, unless anybody else has a question, I think that might be it. Again, please feel free to, the report is up at measuredoutcome.org. This webinar will also be up at measuredoutcome.org in time. We will also be sending you out the link. And thank you very much for attending today. I hope that we've gotten you back to your class. We came in at under the half-hour mark, which makes us all very happy. And we hope that you can get back to your schools and your kids quickly. Laura, anything to add?
No, I think that's all. Just thanks again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend today. Really appreciate it. And I'll be in touch with all of you in the near future. So thank you and have a great day.
Great. Thank you, everybody.